Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on Egypt hosting the annual meetings of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank and the Board of Governors of the African Development Fund from the 22nd till the 26th of May in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. We're going to be focusing on this meeting today, and in light of it, the African Development Bank Group meetings have kick-started in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. Addressing the inaugural session, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi expressed his appreciation to the role played by the bank in addressing development issues in Africa, especially in light of the mounting global economic challenges. Here are the details.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi expressed on Tuesday his appreciation to the role played by the African Development Bank in addressing development issues in Africa, especially in light of mounting global economic challenges. Addressing the inaugural session of the African Development Bank Group's annual meeting in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, President el-Sisi reiterated that Cairo is in continuous support of the efforts to achieve economic development in the continent. He said such meetings offer a chance to exchange expertise to face climate change repercussions, adding that drought repercussions have caused $70 billion of losses in Africa. The president asserted that climate change consequences are most pressuring on least developed nations, adding that mounting challenges and post-COVID consequences facing the world are clear to all. The head of state called on financing institutions to reconsider conditions that qualify countries for loans. He said the private sector should be encouraged to finance environmentally friendly schemes in Africa. President el-Sisi highlighted the role played by the AFDB in finding financing solutions that are suitable to the needs of the continent and the climate change effects it is facing.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And on the sidelines of the African Development Bank Group meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh, President el-Sisi held a number of meetings, and these are some of the details regarding the meetings.
The president held talks with Burundian Prime Minister, who thanked him for Egypt's continued support to his country to provide its development needs, as well as Egypt's stance in backing Burundi on all regional and international forums. The meetings also tackled latest regional developments of mutual concern, especially that related to the Great Lakes, East Africa and the Nile Basin. Separately, the President Sisi met with the President of Comoros, Azali Assoumani, who is the current president of the African Union. President el-Sisi said Egypt is willing to convey its experience in leading the African Union to the Comoros and to activate joint cooperation with the Comoros in different fields. For his part, President Azali appreciated leading Egyptian governments and people's roles in the African continent. The two leaders exchanged points of view over pressing African issues and continued consultations over finding solutions for African crises. Also, President el-Sisi met with Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa, stressing Egypt's keen interest to boost relations with Zimbabwe in trade exchange and investments, whether at a bilateral level or as part of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern African countries, COMESA. President el-Sisi said that cooperation fields with Zimbabwe include technical capabilities building and infrastructure support, as well as coordination and consultations on the leadership level over joint African action issues. For his part, President Mnangagwa said he was looking forward to enhancing bilateral ties with Egypt, notably in economic and commercial fields. Appreciating President el-Sisi's role in tackling African issues and expressing willingness to boost integral efforts with Egypt in facing African challenges. And President el-Sisi met with the head of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, during which they discussed main topics raised on the African Union's agenda, notably economic integration, regional engagement, peace and security, and the institutional reform of the AU. The two sides agreed on continuing close coordination in light of Egypt's position as a key driver for joint African action in order to tap on the leading Egyptian political and development role in serving African continent's interests effectively. Also, President El-Sisi met with Nordos Bekele Thomas, the CEO of the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, the economic development arm of the African Union. The meeting followed up the implementation of priorities set by Egyptian presidency of the NEPAD program between 2023 and 2025 through securing needed financial resources for continental projects within Africa's 2063 development agenda. The president held another meeting with COMESA Secretary General Cheleche Mbato Kempawe. The meeting followed up in the implementation of the most important priorities for the current Egyptian presidency of the COMESA, including strengthening regional supply chains among the COMESA countries, maximizing industrial integration, increasing investment in cross-border infrastructure and interconnection projects. The two sides tackled consultations needed to guarantee a smooth delivery of the COMESA presidency from Egypt to Zambia.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli asserted that it is time for the world to take a look at Africa as a priority for developmental projects. Now, the Prime Minister's remarks came during his participation in the high-level presidential dialogue session about the structure of the changing global financial system and the role of the multilateral development institutions, which held during the activities of the African Development Bank Group's annual meetings. Madbouli also said that the African continent needs a huge amount of financing, about $2 trillion over the next 10 years, to deal with climate change issues and sustainable development goals, as well as $100 million annually for infrastructure projects. The African Development Bank Group meetings are being held under the theme Mobilizing Private Sector Financing for Climate and Green Growth in Africa. The inaugural session witnessed the participation of a number of African presidents, government heads, and various representatives of regional institutions. A number of finance ministers, private sector representatives, academics, and partners of the AFDB Group's member states also attended the session. Addressing the event, Egypt's central bank governor Hassan Abdullah expressed hope that the AFDB Group's meetings will materialize a future mechanism to deal with all issues. He called for finding new financing mechanisms to boost the abilities of African countries before challenges. Abdullah said Africa is not far from global challenges, which highlights the role shouldered by regional and international financing institutions concerned with development issues on the continent, ahead of which the AFDB. In his address to the session, Akinwumi Adesina, the African Development Bank Group's president, warned against the repercussions of climate change on Africa. He said losses due to the phenomenon are calculated at between $7 and $15 billion, adding that the bank is contributing with 40% in the financing of climate initiatives, as well as to the launch of a program to speed up rehabilitation with climate change in Africa. He said the AFDB seeks to establish a number of water treatment stations around the world and hailed Cairo's support in this field, praising Cairo's decision to turn to renewable energy. These are the main stories making the news today, and under the auspices of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt is hosting the 58th Board of Members meeting of the African Development Bank Group and the African Development Fund Group here in Egypt. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Under the auspices of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Egypt is currently hosting the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh from the 22nd of May till the 26th 2023 under the theme of mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth in Africa. The meetings comprise meetings of its governors, finance ministers or central bank governors representing the 81 member countries and knowledge events. Attendees include representatives of bilateral and multilateral development agencies, leading academics and non-governmental organizations, civil society and private sector. The meetings are the bank group's most important event annually, attracting around 4,000 participants. They allow the organization to take stock of progress with its shareholders. They take place as part of the state's directives to strengthen cooperation with African nations across all fields, especially on economic level. The event witnesses the participation of AFDB governors representing 81 regional and non-regional member countries, in addition to governors of central banks, ministers of finance, senior officials from the private sector, academia and development partners. Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt, Hassan Abdullah, stated Egypt is pleased to welcome governors of the African Development Bank and its esteemed guests representing governmental agencies, regional and international financial institutions, and experts participating in the AFDB 2023 annual meetings, which come with high importance in the spate of challenges facing the African continent and current global dynamics. He noted that Egypt is hosting the annual meetings, being an important link in the chain of continuous cooperation with the African Development Bank, which Cairo aspires to maintain in various fields to enhance efforts towards combating climate change and contribute to the transition into green economy in Egypt and in Africa. The event is a good opportunity for the participating countries to exchange their case studies and their expertise, as well as propose innovative financing solutions that catalyze the African development efforts, especially after COVID-19 crisis and repercussions of the geopolitical tensions. This comes in light of the effective participation of regional and international multilateral development financial institutions. The African Development Bank Group's annual meetings also include meetings as well as knowledge events or workshops relevant to the theme of the meetings, and will also hold a high-level dialogue with African Development Bank Group President and his senior management team. The dialogue will focus on ongoing transformation of international financial architecture and how this is likely to affect the vital role of multilateral development institutions as the African Development Bank in lending and assistance to developing countries.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined over the phone by Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, to shed more light on the meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh. Your Excellency, good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well. Mr. Ambassador, now Egypt is hosting the annual meetings of the Board of Members of the African Development Bank Group and the African Development Fund Group. Now, this is the third time Egypt is hosting such a meeting, the last of which was in 1999. And Egypt is the third biggest shareholder of the group and one of the main beneficiaries from it. So how do you explain, or what are the main reasons for having or hosting the meeting after such a long time, since 1999?
I am happy and satisfied at the same time, because whenever a group concerning Africa wants to meet, they always choose Cairo. And I remember our late President Gamal Abdel Nasser, he started to refuse this because he wants to be present in all the capitals of Africa. But Egypt is always a place where everybody would like to come and to see. Now we have the pleasure of being in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's becoming one of the most important cities for conferences all over the world. Now we are talking about the African Development Bank, and it's one tool, and it's a part of the international system for finance, whether for trade, investment, and development. And it is a very important tool, of course, and as you well said, Egypt is one of the main beneficiaries of the bank. I tell you a secret, don't tell anybody, that all the donors, when they talk to us, they want us to take more and more of the money. Why? Because they are glad that Egypt is making very good use of any development assistance. I heard this from the foreign minister of Japan. I heard this from the chairman of the European Bank for Development. I heard several times whenever I attended meetings like that. So Egypt is doing its best, and it is ahead of any economy in the whole continent. We have our experience, which is expanded thousands of years before Christ. So we have a lot to give our brothers in Africa. As you well know, we are hosting thousands of Africans studying in our Al-Azhar al-Sharif or in our schools and universities. We have missions in most of the African countries to help them for their development, whether teaching, whether they are doctors, engineers, in many fields. So the bank is here, and we have to make very good use of this, especially in tourism. It's a good advertisement for Egypt when you have 4,000 guests from all the countries of the world. This is a very good propaganda for our tourism.
Yes.
Also, it's a propaganda for our economy that it is, of course, having its challenges, but we are doing much better than many other countries. We are one of the rare countries who are still developing positively. As you well know, according to the IMF, most of the countries of the world are diminishing concerning their GDP.
Mr. Ambassador, now this is the 58th annual meeting of the African Development Bank Group and the 49th meeting of the African Development Fund Group. Now, what are the differences between the objectives and the responsibilities of both the bank and the group, the fund group?
No, we are all working for the same purpose. We are for the development of Africa. We are for more intra-trade. We are for more investment, whether between the African countries themselves or to be clever and to attract foreign direct investment. And Egypt made a very good initiative during the presidency of our president to the African Union when we called on the donor countries to come and invest on the African soil with the Egyptian experience, which is very good and cheaper, less expensive. And our president got a positive reaction from Japan when he attended the TICAD conference in Tokyo. He got a positive reaction from the European Union and from China, and China is going ahead to help Africa for its development programs.
Yes.
So we are talking about development, trade, investment, and whatever activities we are keen to develop between in every African country and between the African countries and themselves.
Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, hosting the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group and African Development Fund Group is actually a very concrete step towards achieving green growth and also sustainable development goals. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Hosting the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group in Sharm el-Sheikh from the 22nd of May to 26th under the theme of mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth in Africa aligns with Egypt's directions to strengthen cooperation with African countries in various fields, particularly in economic realm. The annual meetings are attended by governors from 81 regional and non-regional member states of the African Development Bank. The event also witnesses the presence of central bank governors, finance ministers, senior officials from the private sector, academics, and development partners. The delegates will consider green financing tools as green bonds, sustainable bonds, social bonds, sustainability loans, and debt nature or debt climate swaps. Participants will discuss national and international levers to overcome obstacles to implementing such instruments, with lessons from best practices in Africa and internationally. The African Development Bank hopes to foster the development of innovative financial instruments to support investment in climate and green growth while ensuring a fairer distribution of resources across Africa. The African Development Bank invests heavily in agriculture, one of the key sectors contributing to inclusive growth and sustainable development in Africa. In a global context marked by multiple global crises since the emergence of COVID-19 in 2020, Africa has shown resilience. Amid headwinds, the continent continues to show positive economic growth. According to the African Development Bank's Africa Macroeconomic Performance and Outlook, the continent's real gross domestic product could expand by an average of 4% in 2023-2024. This is above global averages of 2.7% and 3.2%. The report shows that 53 of the bank's 54 African member countries increased their GDP in 2020, which could continue in the next 2 years. The additional wealth created is expected to exceed 5% in several countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo 6.8%, Gambia 6.4%, Togo 6.3%, Libya 12.9%, Mozambique 6.5%, Niger 9.6%, and Senegal 9.4%. Even so, apart from climate risk, many challenges remain, such as poverty and inequality, which, albeit declining, remain a concern. The African Development Bank annual meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh are aimed at mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth in Africa. The stakes are high. If Africa achieves inclusive growth and sustainable development, it will lift millions out of poverty and provide a better future for its citizens.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here tonight in the studio by Dr. Batran, the former chair of the Technological Committee at the Egyptian Parliament and the foresight expert. Dr. Batran, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure being here.
It's a pleasure is ours. Dr. Batran, first of all, now, this is a very important annual meeting of the board members of the African Development Bank Group and the African Development Fund Group. And it is held under the theme of mobilizing private sector financing and funding towards green and climate growth, climate agenda and growth in Africa. So this is a main theme for really focusing on the private sector for trying to finance climate action and green economy. How is this going to work? How big of a burden is it now on the private sector to lend in a helping hand with the public sector?
Well, that's a difficult one, but I will start with what President Sisi said in his speech in the morning. He said that Africa needs over $200 billion for sustainable development requirements, and it requires over $108 billion for reaching the climate goals set by the COP27. So these are two numbers put together. Africa needs over 300 and something, and you're touching on a $400 billion in the coming few years to reach the level of giving the African person, the average African person, a minimum level of requirements for human rights of a global citizen of the world. This is number one. Number two, Africa has a very special place amongst the continents of the world. Africa is rich in resources, and it's underdeveloped. So the opportunity is there for the private sector to fill the gap. So the gap is required from governments, and it is something that is in the 21st century, fourth industrial revolution, with ChatGPT. You are talking about real requirements of a human African person, citizen, living on this continent. And the world needs the resources that Africa has as well. So it is a real chance for African business, for international business, for African multilaterals, like the meeting today, and for international multilaterals. And you've seen a presence of the international members of the global industrial community. We've seen members of the United Arab Emirates for the COP27 reasons. So whatever it is that's happening now in Africa requires a global cooperation, if you will, on a business level, on an economical level, and on a financial multilateral level. So that is really, there is so much required that really no one entity can do it by itself. So business sector is definitely required.
Well, talking about the business sector and the private sector, I mean, we are suffering, I mean, the whole world is suffering from dire economic challenges as a result of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now,
preceded by the corona.
Preceded by the corona pandemic. So these are two knockouts right after each other. And each country, each government, and each business is really trying to hang on to the resources they have, trying to protect the finances they have. And now we're trying to convince everyone that it is for the greater good, it is for their own benefit to start investing in green energy and climate action. How big of a challenge is it, especially that we hosted COP27 in November, so we're just a few months, it's less than a year. How hard is it to convince the private sector to actually be able to finance, be it African business institutions or international ones, and at the same time commit the international community to the pledges they made in COP27?
My answer is easy. It's easy to convince them. They don't have other options. You just mentioned two knockouts around the world, and Africa is the chance. Africa is the hope. Africa is the optimism, and Africa is the future. So if a business person cannot see the opportunity, he does not deserve the title of a business person. If economists, world and global economists, cannot see the opportunity that is glaring them in the face from this African rich green continent, nothing can. The international business community looks at the global opportunities. It does not look only at African opportunities. And like you mentioned, COVID-19, Russian, Ukraine, Europe issues. So the opportunity is where? The opportunity is one of the places, and the main largest opportunity of the world is Africa. And no one country has the same, and they are talking about projects that fits in with the global agenda. You are talking about infrastructure and cross-country infrastructure, not regular infrastructure. So eventually, economic strategic infrastructure that is looking at cross-country trade agreements. We are not only now, President El-Sisi today met with the head of the Secretary General of the COMESA. So this is Eastern and Southern Africa. We're talking about the African Union from a trade perspective. We're talking about water security. We're talking about green transformation. So we are really at a very interesting point in our African history, because we don't only want to invest in infrastructure, but invest in green infrastructure as well. So the opportunity is definitely there. The sun is there if we're talking solar. We are talking about water is there in some places in Africa. If we're talking hydro production of water, electricity from water sources. So you are talking about fantastic reserves of gold. Look what's happening in the region around us because of gold. You are talking about selenium, you are talking about very technologically oriented minerals that is there in Egypt and in other African countries. So you're really looking at the resources of the world of the future. And this is the right time to invest.
Yes. Well, there is a new climate action window that really focuses on 6 sectors, including agriculture, food security, water security, green finance, low carbon infrastructure, transport resilience, many of these things. And there is a technical support component that would help African countries spend any sort of funding or money they get in terms of development and transformation from one sort of economy into a greener economy, trying to combat climate change. How important is this technical support component, and how ready are the many of the African states ready to receive such a know-how, expertise, because some countries are more developed than others, so it might be an uphill still task for many of the African states?
Again, the opportunity is enormous. And you are talking about you are talking about green transformation, and you are talking about also fintech. And you know that after the couple of days of the 3 days, the conference, there is a parallel and a consecutive conference related to fintech as well, and related to agricultural technology. So this is a massive opportunity. Africa has the consumers, has the availability of the resources of its continent, including the manpower and citizens and consumers in some cases as well. And you are talking about international expertise, top-notch, of important countries of the world, and you are talking about African multilaterals, regional multilaterals like the Islamic Bank, and global multilaterals like the IMF or the World Bank. And there is also the part of the BRICS, you know, we also joined the BRICS, and we issued, and the president signed the final agreement for the integration of Egypt into the BRICS Development Bank, so to speak. All of these are opportunities, real on-time opportunities of growth for the technical expertise and know-how from a business perspective, for the people, changing people's lives, creating job opportunities for Africans, and actually impacting the medium and long term as well for the general group of citizens living in 1, 2, or more countries that are cooperating together on certain specific projects. You're talking about green hydrogen, you're talking about the road, the infrastructure. I'm giving you various examples. You are talking about fantastic opportunities in fintech, financial technology, opportunities, new financial vehicles available for young Africans to create opportunities and growth for their future. So they are not thinking like us, the millennials, the Gen Zs, the Generation Z, and the younger generations, those born after the year 2000, think in a totally different way. So you're creating the infrastructure for them to start joining the workforce now. They are hitting on their final school years, college years, of course, I mean. So you are talking about, it's really an integrative effort, and you will find always the word integration, you will find the word cooperation, and it's always with the green, sustainable, and technology. So you mix these words together and you come up with something in agriculture, you come up with something in energy, you come up with something. They all integrate together to give a path. And I hope not repeat myself more than necessary, but it's creating a path for the collective African countries and their citizens for hope, for growth, for job opportunity, for economic growth, internal economic growth, and cooperation that would entail of external and international and the technical know-how, economic growth, so to speak. So we are winning as Africans, and the international expertise and technical expertise is cooperating with us.
Yes.
So it's a win-win-win situation.
Dr. Batran, whenever you're a guest on our show, you always mention the importance of SMEs and entrepreneurs and the youth and the younger generations, as you've just mentioned. Now, maybe all these startups and all these businesses by entrepreneurs, they don't have the financial might that maybe other multinationals have. So is there some sort of a mechanism where you can integrate the SMEs, the entrepreneurs, having, even if they're providing services with the multinationals, and at the same time protecting those entrepreneurs not being taken advantage by the multinationals in order to achieve green growth and combat climate change?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you very much. I was just discussing this right before I came onto your show with some government officials here in Egypt. I'll give you an example of the Moroccan example. Boeing started manufacturing various parts, and I got to know that Boeing is manufacturing more than 10,000 different plane parts, from the tail to the wings, engines, chairs, plastics, everything in the Morocco. All of the parts are not really being produced by large factories. Some require the expertise of large factories and massive know-how, and some smaller, seemingly less important parts are produced by smaller factories and SMEs and so on. So the example of Boeing as a massive project, and Boeing now, as you know, is turning green, because everything is turning green. So it is a green project, it's a sustainable project, it's a project that is a directive of all of the country, not only with financing of multilaterals, by the way, and integrating the SMEs. So I hope that this, as an example, gives you an idea that if we in Egypt decide to choose a sector or two, even a product, a particular car, an electric car, including lithium batteries, know-how, include maybe mobile phones, like we are in Egypt, you know, the Project IBDA, the industrial initiative. So once we create this product, big products, you break it down into smaller products that you can integrate the SMEs and integrate it and finance it via multilaterals, and finance it via the financial institutions, the local financial institutions, like the جهاز تنمية المشروعات, the General Authority for the Promotion of SMEs in Egypt, the Nasser Bank, for example, the Social Bank. So there are local entities, financial entities, that have the financial ability, that there are the international multilaterals. There's a massive program with the World Bank and the National Solidarity Ministry to enhance small business and to enhance non-permanent workers. So the finances, once we work together, it's there. And then what I think we are missing in our Egypt is to start pushing the SMEs, pushing the young people towards a certain direction. Not you should do your own project. No, you should do a project creating a plastic cover for a mobile phone, creating a certain ring for a certain engine that is required, creating and knowing how much I require out of this ring as an industry. You can, you know, how many factories you require. So it's really an integrated thing. We have most of it. What we are only lacking is pushing the direction to, or leading the young SMEs towards really the industry of choice, or the industries and sectors of choice. And I like your last word, even if it is a consumer good. So Egypt needs, for example, more breadsticks, or more sweets for young people, or more biscuits. So even if it's a consumer good, you are pushing them towards it, maintain quality, they will make it's a sort of country-directed franchise, if you will.
Yes.
But it is not one product. It's several products geared towards a certain industry.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Batran has mentioned, and she always mentions the importance of entrepreneurs and young investors and business people, that it's not just about starting and coming up with your own idea, but also directing it into the right market, into the right purpose, where it would be quite beneficial for their business and the Egyptian economy as a whole. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Mail Batran, the former chair of the Technological Committee of the Egyptian Parliament and foresight expert. Dr. Batran, always a pleasure having you with us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Night International. I'm Henia Saif. Thank you for joining us.